unable to break for 10 minutes. So maybe we'll try for 15 next time. So you have received a couple of handouts. One is a draft of the agenda for February. The second item is a handout. We will discuss this after lunch. It's a handout for our executive director's report on staffing and budget that we requested last week. So we'll give you some time to look it over the lunch break. So we have a couple items we'd like to deal with before we break for our expense report training. So why don't we take a brief look at the agenda and see if any of the other commissioners have any input. Commissioner Yao's point was well taken that it's going to be much more workable for the chair and the vice chair of that meeting to, work with staff to finalize what's actually posted. But I just wanted to offer the full commission an opportunity for final input, particularly because this will be the first time that we will be doing agendas for our subcommittees, our advisory subcommittees. So keeping in mind, again, that we want our items to be as broad as possible, and the chair and vice chair of that meeting, I'm certain will work on a detailed version of that so that we can work more efficiently as we approach that date.
Chair Dye, I think that's an excellent idea that the chair and the vice chair put some structure to our agenda. And I'm assuming that the commissioners all have a chance to submit ideas and concepts. So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So anything that we're missing? Note that item 7, we agreed last time to make a standing item in case, God forbid, that somebody else should resign, that we always have that as something we can act on. I have a question. We had talked about having committee reports back to the full commission as a standing item. Is that necessary, given that we have the detail for each of the advisory subcommittees?
It doesn't hurt to have it as a standing item. We can put that in there easily. Just put down reports of advisory committees as a standing agenda item, and so it's always there.
Great. Commissioner Dyer, can I just make a suggestion that on number 7, the evaluation of candidates, should we just remove Commissioner Lane Co's name and just say for any absence?
For any
because
commissioner.
that'll tie our hands if it says just for Commissioner
We can
Quo.
just, if it's acceptable, cut that sentence off right at the end of the reference to the government code.
Great. Good suggestion.
The other, I would also add, am I on? The other word I'd add is that it's the selection of a replacement commissioner. Because I think it sort of identifies what we're doing.
Oh, so selection of, so put insert replacement. Okay, so we have 2 changes. Any
If
other?
we're able to invite speakers to address the entire commission, where would that, which agenda item would that fall under?
I would imagine it would be item 6.
So that would encompass the actual training itself. Thank you.
I think you can put it into item 6 or item 4, redistricting matters. I mean,
Right.
that's a pretty broad one, so if you have a speaker to come in and talk about nuts and bolts of using maps and software, I think it would fall under 4 or 6.
And how about discussion of consultants and so on? Would that fit under?
Item 4.
Sai, is that your interpretation?
You
as
mean
well?
the topic of their discussion?
No, let's say discussion of hiring consultants and hiring expertise and so on.
Item 3.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I now see it. Okay, thank you.
It's been there, and my brain just blanked on it as well. It's right there, so we're good.
And I would also imagine that at every meeting, we'd have a report from the executive director on our finances, et cetera, updates on staffing for the purpose of this meeting, and I assume for the purpose of future meetings that would fall under a general commission governance item, which is item 1 on the February agenda.
Does that work, or would you like to just add executive director's report as a standing
Why don't we call
item?
that out, yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Chairperson Dye, has any thought been given to the actual logistics of how the subcommittees will be scheduled on the Wednesday based on who's on the various committees?
Thought has been given, we're still sorting that out right now. Hopefully we can finalize it this afternoon.
And with regard to that, Bagley Keene is satisfied by an announcement at the meeting itself, so long as the time and place is nearby, near in time and near in place. Obviously, if we kind of get it sorted out and get better information, it'd be good to put it on the web, but it can be done at the meeting. And if it's not clear from the verbiage I have in there, one of the things I meant to convey was the Bagley Keene provision that the committee agendas can be used. The committees can have the agenda of the commission as a whole as their agenda. So even if the committees didn't have anything listed separately under them, as I read the statute, as long as they discussed matters within the items listed on the commission as a whole agenda, they'd be fine. I put these in there specifically because they were part of the notes that we had of what you want to discuss in these advisory committee meetings.
The sign language translators and foreign language translators, need that be the request, the solicitation for requests, does that need to be included in this announcement somewhere?
It is on the bottom.
I think we had discussed at a previous meeting throwing in there some examples of the types of auxiliary aids or services. So, for example, the sign language translation or Spanish, just maybe adding a phrase in that sentence.
Mm-hmm. Could we add some detail, for example, in the last paragraph?
Well, yeah, absolutely we can. Just I'd ask for any suggestions, or we could just put in there for let's see, persons with disabilities and language, something about language. If somebody's got some nice words, translation.
Let's see, for the February meeting, as I identified earlier, the only provision we're considering is just the sign language and Spanish language. I'm not sure we're ready to handle any additional requests beyond that. Do you want to somehow noted that in this announcement? I think maybe at future meetings in Sacramento we can.
Well, I think we're not promising anything. We're just saying that if you're requesting it, you have to let us know 5 days in advance. I don't think we're committing to actually providing it. So the main thing is they need to know that they have a deadline.
Well, let me just be sure I got it right. I heard two things. One, in that last paragraph, which is kind of a general notice that if you need help of some kind or would like it, here's how you request it. And to include in there language, something about language.
Yes.
Now, secondly, I thought Commissioner Yao was saying, can we make a special notice for the Claremont meeting indicating signage and Spanish translation will be available, if that's
If
what you meant,
requested.
and we can certainly do that as well.
I just want to make sure that we have an understanding that we're not going to request for any additional quote-unquote services unless staff or this commission is bringing that with us. In other words, if somebody wants a German translator and there's enough requests for it, I feel uneasy making that last-minute request of the host and expect it to happen automatically.
Well, given the language that I see here, it says any person who wishes to request special accommodations or auxiliary aids. I don't see that as locking us into providing it, but.
As long as there's that understanding, I'm fine with it. I'm not asking for anything further. If it's here in Sacramento, I have absolutely no issue with it.
Okay.
Madam
Commissioner?
Chair, there's also, I think, a need, if this is the agenda or even in a modified form that will be available to the public, there needs to be something about public comment.
Did we miss that? Yes, there is, at the end of the agenda.
Okay.
Again, just as a reminder, Bagley Keene requires you allow the public to comment before a vote on each item you're going to vote on. The rest of that is really up to you. Typically, commissions allow somewhere in their meeting public comment on matters not on the agenda, which is usually very helpful. But the thing to know is if you err on the side of public comment, you're fine. There's no prohibition against public comment.
On the contrary. Any other input? So this agenda will be, this general agenda will be posted today, so that will give us adequate notice for the committees to meet on Wednesday. I noticed that it is, this is right now designed to really be noticed very specifically for the first half. I wonder if we want to, it may not be practical because we may not have the facilities in Claremont, but I wonder if, originally we had talked about noticing the entire month and then revising it later as we updated things, just so we had the flexibility to meet if necessary, if there was some kind of emergency. And of course, it couldn't be more than a 2-week emergency, but I just wanted to see if there were any thoughts on that.
Well, it seems we might give staff a chance to see what the facilities which facilities we might end up with on the second meeting in February. So we can be specific about it.
Just to be clear now, I heard Commissioner Dye asking a different question. The way we agendized and noticed our first meeting was basically beginning to end of January. When I was just sort of throwing this together last night, I had no location other than Claremont, but we did have 2 sets of dates. That's obviously helpful to the public. It does limit your flexibility somewhat, so I wanted to be sure that what we sent out was what you intended us to send out in terms of how you wanted to notice February.
Right, and originally we had talked about giving ourselves the flexibility, but making it clear that right now we expect it to meet certain days. So I just want to throw that out, because even if Claremont were not available and we decided we needed to meet, say, a couple days earlier for the second half of February, we would have time at that meeting to provide that notice. So the question is whether that's practical or not, whether that really buys us anything.
On the first line, it reads Wednesday, February 9th through Sunday, February 13th. And we can specify the Claremont location. And then continuing February 14th through the end of the month, maybe we can, at this point, specify Sacramento and then identify the location will be posted 14 days in advance of the 14th.
Good. And so we'll just revise this top thing that says Claremont College, because.
Yeah, I'll provide you the
Yeah.
exact address. In other words, go
No,
ahead
I'm
and
just saying
announce
we
it,
have
and go
to-
ahead and announce the second half of the meeting in Sacramento and promise to give the exact date 14 days in advance of the February 14th, or by February 1st.
Right, no, I agree, on just the top of the meeting notice and agenda, and bold under that, it says Claremont
Right,
College.
I'll provide the
Yeah.
exact address
Yeah.
and location.
Did you get that?
So we want to specify Claremont location for February 9 through 13.
Correct.
We then want to,
Specify a different location for, starting from the 14th through the end of the month, and promise to revise the agenda
To update it.
on or before February 1st for the second half of the meeting.
okay. Honorable, all right. Let me see what I can do. I think I know what you want to do. You want to, but I want to be sure, you want to continue right after Claremont through the rest of the month.
We want to have the
Give us
option to
maximum flexibility.
hold a meeting without, in other words, if we decide on the 13th that we need a couple more days,
Then we can meet.
that we can meet, okay?
It's the same principle we use for January, which is we want to give maximum flexibility.
I'm just trying to think of it through.
You know,
because
actually,
in-
they may not,
In January, we
it
have
may
one
not
location.
be necessary or appropriate to specify the second half of the meeting, because wherever we're going to hold a meeting on February the 14th, we're going to have to notice it by February 1st.
Okay.
So why don't we just notice it through Sunday, February 13th, and then we'll take care of any future date in a timely manner so that we can legally hold a meeting.
A second question I had, we had talked about the idea of doing this pilot or some sort of public outreach or education, and I noticed that the timing, even though the space is available to us in the evenings, we only have agendized 9:30 to 4:30 PM.
Yeah, that was just a holdover from the last agenda. Whatever time you want to put in there is fine.
I think I keep on wanting to call it a pilot meeting, but the first initial meeting, I think we probably need to notice it different, or have a second notice for that as compared to combining it with the business meeting.
Okay, and so keep in mind, we probably, assuming that the soonest we would be able to do that would, say, be Friday evening. That means we have to decide that before we leave here.
Correct.
So we can keep that separate and put a different agenda together for that meeting.
We need a separate notice for the outreach on the 12th, if we decide to have one.
Okay, yes, that's one thing. So, and the second thing is now I understand, I'm hoping I understand correctly, that we're going to do a notice solely for Feb. 9 through 13. And then once we figure out where to meet for the second half of the month, we'll do another notice.
Correct.
Which we'll probably have to do before we leave, so we'll just need to get some details.
Okay.
Any other input, things that are missing? We want to make sure that we can cover in February. Okay. So the next chair and the next vice chair can caucus with staff to finalize this, but I think we have all the input that you need. Well, we are going to need to break in 5 minutes, so I'm trying to see if it's going to be useful for us to start a discussion for the last 5 minutes. I think our discussion on the philosophy of business versus meetings to take public testimony will probably go longer than 5 minutes. So I'm wondering if there's any other item that we would like to take care of, or whether we should just go ahead and break early and get our expense report training. No suggestions? Okay. Why don't we go ahead and just break now? It's 11:25. We're going to recess to take care of an administrative matter and then for lunch. And then we will reconvene at 1 o'clock here to continue the agenda. And we will have a couple items. I think maybe we'll start with the staff report, which is ready now. So please review that over lunch and have questions ready. And then we can continue our discussion about meetings for February. All right. Thank you.